surface water of the Pacific Ocean. That's the top part. Could be 10,000 times as high as contamination after Chernobyl. Think about that. Now, do remember that they are testing the water independently, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, at the surface. They're testing it down to 500 feet. That's the most they're going down. And they're finding, let's say, 4.6 becquerels at the surface, 4.4 100 feet down, 4.5 at 500 feet down. In other words, it's very thoroughly permeated. The water is penetrated and toxified almost uniformly down to 500 feet. That's what Woods Hole has found out. We don't know what's deeper than that. We do know that the sea life has been acting very strangely. Most strangely of all, a lot of it has been dying. Doesn't get any more weird than that, does it? We've seen concentrations in Santa Cruz, Monterey Bay, enormous amounts of sea life, unprecedented amounts of sea life, trying, obviously, to get away from the oncoming radiation. There's no other logical explanation. The government has already begun its disinformation campaign. Fortunately, there are courageous people. The city of Fairbanks just passed a city ordinance calling for mandatory monitoring of the water and the air and the fish and everything. They're going to do a job up there. How many reports, again, as I've said so often, have you seen from the EPA? 0. Does the EPA care about your welfare? You answer the question. Dr. Bill Deagle is with us tonight to help us bring up to date all of you on the situation. We'll be talking about some other news stories as well that will help you understand the data. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think what people should realize is there's going to be a change in the profile of radioisotopes that the sea life and people will be exposed to. Some of those radioisotopes are going to dramatically increase the longer isotopes like cesium and strontium and other isotopes that the ones that are going to incorporate most quickly in the biological systems are ions that are common to the body, like strontium and cesium. The other ones are going to displace and end up in the bone like mercury does if you have mercury amalgams. You have the heavier isotopes. You'll still continue to have radioiodine and tritium, et cetera. So what people should realize, the new symptoms will be neurological, cardiac, and ion channels and cell membranes. And that can cause behavioral changes, reproductive behaviors, organogenesis. For example, spontaneous miscarriages will increase dramatically. Neurological behavior, zombie-like behavior, seizure-like activity, cardiac arrhythmias, vascular disease like strokes and heart attacks.
Zombie-like behavior. This is very interesting. With an enormous tens of millions of Americans already on zombie meds called SSRIs or antidepressants, this is going to make people literally, potentially stand around the streets drooling.
Right. Well, they're not really antidepressants. It's actually a lie to call them antidepressants.
Of course it is.
They're actually dissociative anesthetic, and they put the brain into what's called a theta rhythm. And the theta rhythm basically puts you in a dream state. So
that's let me say this. You're right. I want you to continue. For our listeners, the brain has 4 states of being. Beta, that's what we're in right now. Right. Alpha, which is kind of relaxed, sit back. Theta, which is dream or sleep. And delta, which is dead to the world.
Right. So when people go into theta, if they have a nightmare like they're having flashbacks and they're trying to shoot the enemy in the Gulf, or they have a nightmare that they're going to kill their family when they get back from the Gulf, they can do it. And we can
live it out. That's what happens on SSRIs. They live their nightmares.
They live their nightmares. Now, what happens is you have to think of the brain. Remember the old black and white photographs that would have, and you'd have what you get from your camera is you get negatives. And they were real, and of course they had to be opened up in a dark room, and then they would create the positive, which is your picture. Now, the way that the brain records things is actually like a negative, like the old style black and white type pictures. And so it records it as a shadow of against a background of stimulation. Now, if you have too much stimulation, it's like having so much light, you can't see the image, and you end up with what's called overstimulated facilitated pathways. And what that basically means is the brain opens up pathways that can cause seizure-like activity, makes it difficult to record memories in the brain, because memories are recorded as basically like a negative. And there are what's called a glutamate agonist. So when you take things like cesium-137 in particular, it acts as an analog of magnesium and potassium that help to create that negative image in your brain. So your brain actually records memories, in a sense, as a negative of a counter-stimulation, as a suppression of an overstimulation pathway. What that means is almost like, I call it, we already have things like aspartame and Splenda and MSG that we call glutamate agonists. Well, it turns out that a superglutamate agonist is cesium-137.
Wow. Oh.
And so what it does is, if you're already drinking aspartame pop, which generates diketopiperazine, which is a neurotoxin, genotoxin, methyl alcohol, and formaldehyde.
DKP also causes brain tumor. It's a brain tumor agent.
Right. In fact, you can see the change in the chromatin clumping within minutes if you take a neural culture and put the diketopiperazine in it. What happens is that the aspartame, I call it the electronic aspartame effect, is amplified by glutamate agonists, and it turns out the cesium amplifies it a lot. So if you take an animal and expose them to cesium, it tends to concentrate in glandular organs, because that's where your potassium, magnesium. So you're going to get effects on glands like thyroid gland, adrenal gland.
You're
sexual
in trouble.
glands.
Big trouble.
And also the areas that control the diurnal patterns of your brain. So you're going to start seeing things like agitation, insomnia, and effectively we call what I call a toxic lobotomy of frontal lobe executive activity. So you don't get suppression of normal restraint against inappropriate human behavior. So as people get more toxic, very gradually, they start to show low-level effects of toxic CNS effects of things like vertigo, loss of judgment, manic depressive behavior can be pushed forward.
Oh, watch what happens. Rage will begin to surface in a lot of people.
To see people act inappropriately and not have normal suppression, because it's your frontal lobes that actually suppresses the amygdala and the subthalamic rage control nucleus. And so if you don't have executive functions, you start to see more people with road rage. You also see people with higher levels of atrial fibrillation, tachycardia, and cardiac arrest.
Can you imagine, Bill, all the veterans coming back who are mind wrecked already and on meds when they get around this stuff and it begins to accumulate?
Right. It's toxic polypharmacy, and of course then we have on top of that genetically modified food. And what people don't realize, even if they don't have GMO vegetables, they're eating meat that's fed GMO soy and corn.
Of course. Well,
and if you don't have meat that's not fed GMO soy and corn, these produce all kinds of toxins in the body that the body can't handle. Yeah. And by and large, whenever you get a toxin, especially say the nervous system, it tends to make the astroglial cells fire too much. And when they fire too much, you lose your normal ability to learn neural nets and suppress the inappropriate behavior. And you start to see, I call a stripping away of the higher brain functions, like the cortical brain functions. And you get down to what's called the reptilian brain. Well, which is the anatomical description of the very base activities of the brain.
Yeah. Now, you said something also very interesting, that the type of radioisotopes, radionuclides, the profile from the first wave, and this is a continuous wave, are going to change. Because what's being released now in Fukushima is, by and large, it goes hand in hand with the 1991 model that the Germans did. I think the Germans or the Danes, which showed a reactor that melts down along the ocean after a period of about 3 years, begins to emit a predominant outflow of strontium-90, which is about as bad as it gets. And that's exactly what they found at Fukushima.
It's just because of the half-life, primarily, because it's been coming all along. The other thing is that as these corium are acting like a lava lamp, you're going to start seeing it generating the profile of heavier isotopes. More plutonium, more americium, more all kinds of unusual radioisotopes that are going to be very nasty. So...
All right, in the top 500 feet of the ocean, apparently a lot of it is toxified. When that begins to roll ashore, as I said, it's going to be an accumulation process. Every wave that rolls up, all the mist, the microsolized aero droplets will come on shore in the marine layer, and they'll begin to embed themselves in the topsoil. The plants will uptake them. People will breathe them. If you've got groundwater, open groundwater, reservoirs and so forth, they'll become toxic. Now, I can't say how much. I don't know. Am I telling you you're going to die in a week or a month or a year? No. But I want to ask this. You're your medical doctor background. You just described a couple dozen new symptoms from something that these doctors are not going to be trained to look for.
Yeah, the problem is that, to be honest with you, with the change in the environment that their subjects, people, are exposed to, none, and I mean none of the naturopathic, MD, or even holistic MDs are properly trained in radiotoxicology, in functional genetic medicine, and in these, how to even recognize these.
Mm-hmm.